Welcome to the PinLeader Podcast, where strategic leaders get straight to the topics, strengthening our awareness and sharpening our minds. The PinLeader Podcast is produced by Roar, a production division of Mays & Associates Ltd. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Now here is your award-winning host, Dr. Shanda Gore.
And welcome back to the PinLeader Podcast. Today we are doing Podcast 101 for our listeners who are very interested in how to start a podcast and what it takes to really maintain and sustain it. And today I have with me Ms.Tisha Mays, who is the Executive Director and founder of aMAYSing Kids. And that is a program focused on getting young people ready for reading and teaching broadcasting skills. She has a bachelor's of radio and television from Akron University, a master's in strategic communication from Bowling Green State University, and she is officially a PhD candidate in media communications. She has a teacher's education degree, and she's a lecturer at the University of Toledo. And I'm so glad to have with me. Welcome, Tisha.
Hello, Dr. Gore. How are you? It's such a pleasure and an honor to join you once again.
You know, when you came before, you talked about how podcasting can improve and impact reading, especially in our young people.
That's right.
And so today we have I get so many questions about what it takes to have a podcast because you figured out your why and why you have
That's
one.
right. Yes. Yes, there is. And I think if we could go back a little bit, think about the pandemic. Let's go back to the pandemic for a moment. And during that time, podcasts, they seen a hike. Why do you think that is? What was happening during that time to where folks perhaps maybe needed outlet? Okay. There was a lot happening at that time. We were in the house with our kids and our partners. And at that time, we had television, right? Mm-hmm. What did we see on the news? What was on the news most of the time? When we watched television, we saw everything was just sad. We learned about the death toll, the hospitalizations, and everything was about. And then when it came to television, we didn't see any new episodes of our favorite shows. There was no new productions happening. Mm-hmm. So people were stuck when they were watching television, seeing the same news over and over and over again about, the things that were happening in our. Then we would go to our favorite TV stations and we were watching reruns because there was not a lot of production. Folks were turning on that radio where they were getting entertainment, they were getting information, and they were able to hear relatable stories and, connect with other people. But then also podcasting skyrocketed because people learned that with their phone, that they had a voice, they were able to communicate, they were able to be creative, and they were able to get their thoughts out. It became an outlet. They enjoyed it. We're like, wait a minute, I actually sound pretty good. I have something to say. During that time, during that spike, we've seen a lot of shows, a lot of video podcasts, folks that would do there was a lot of additional content creation that was happening. Mm-hmm. And, back in the day, years ago, you would need a big mixing board or you would create a podcast from your phone. But now you have equipment that is made specifically for podcasters, and it's user friendly. It's not complicated to use. You have a lot of editing systems. There's different AI softwares that you could use to help you engage, to be creative, and to help assist you in the creative process. So now we're at the stage where anybody can make a podcast. Mm-hmm. And I tell my students that all the time. I teach a podcasting class at UT. And I say, what makes the difference here with you sitting here, there's still a skill to it.
That's what I've noticed too. You can tell individuals who are experimenting with podcasting versus those that are unlike yourself. You teach it. You're teaching others on how to podcast and have coursework built on this.
Sure.
So you really want to seek out that instruction before you get launching into a podcast.
You do. And there's a few things that you want to consider. Number one, you want to make sure that you have the proper equipment. Now, the proper equipment does not mean it has to be expensive. There's little small podcasts, we call it a task cam. It's very small, very portable. Those are pretty affordable. They're like $129. Or you can get smaller interface systems that can run you about $40. You know, now there's top of the line. You can tell some difference in some sound quality, right? So I'm not saying go out and get the cheapest thing, but if you do your homework, do some research, you can do some Google searches. YouTube reviews are really good from content creators who have experimented with different interfaces and different boards and different microphones. They have folks who have done a lot of us who, that are, folks who are amateurs, they have experimented with a lot of different pieces of equipment and different software that they have become experts in knowing what's working and what's not, right? And so, just kind of to kick it off, you want to find something, you want to have a decent microphone.
I was going to say, the first thing I'm thinking is a microphone.
You got to have a decent mic.
And let's talk about the different kinds.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have condenser microphones, you have dynamic microphones, you have the microphones that are condenser microphones that are XLR, they require phantom power. It gets really technical. But then also you have really great microphones that are USB microphones as well. It depends on your setup. So where are you planning to do this podcast? Which we need to get on that. So let's go back to the equipment real quick.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You could get you a smaller interface like a Zoom TAC, a little bit more. Some of them are cost efficient and they go up the line to Rodecaster, which has been the standard podcast system. They're coming up with different versions of and different, to where now you're adding video switchers and things like that. Mm-hmm. So we're at a Rodecaster 2, but you can still use a Rodecaster 1.
I think it also matters if you're doing video too.
Sure, 100%.
I've had a combination of individuals saying, well, if you had video, then it engages, which video, no problem, video. Right. But you've also got to think about the ability on the other side is that editing.
Right.
Because it takes more. And I've seen podcasts a little rough where people are in one position, but they edit it and they're
that's a whole nother show because now you're, like I said, once you introduce that video switcher, you're adding a different dynamic to it. Now you've got to make sure that you have the right streaming software and the right mixer and your streaming cameras. So considering that you have proper equipment, it doesn't mean you can start a podcast relatively inexpensively. The more you get into it, the more use you get out of it. You want to start, if it's something you want to do for a hobby, I wouldn't suggest for you to go and spend thousands of dollars on podcasting equipment. But if you want to do it, then you could get something that would save you some money and you wouldn't have to spend a ton of money on microphones. And because you can have expensive equipment like we're sitting on right now and still have it sound bad, right? If you don't know what you're doing. That's number one. And then also your why. Why are you doing the podcast? Are you doing it to have fun? Or my students in my classroom, it's like, okay, yeah, anybody can make a podcast, but can they make a good podcast? And can they make some money?
That's right there. I had to ask you because sometimes I've asked people and people ask me, what motivated you? And it's funny because I started first with the why, what pushed me. Yeah. And then I went into, I better get some equipment.
Right.
But I think what you're saying very clearly is some of that goes along hand to hand. And then figuring out the format. Do you want to interview? Do you want to?
That's right. Because that matters. Because if I'm doing a show like this, I need this beautiful setup. Because you have some amazing guests come in here. And you're setting the tone in this space. It's comfortable. The lighting is beautiful. Beautiful artwork. Beautiful faces. It's a pleasant space. And so you want your space to be welcoming.
Well, thank you.
Now, right? So, but if you were to go somewhere, if it's somewhere cold and we're at in a basement somewhere, you may not get that same energy. So you want to create that energy. You had the smell good candles over there. You had two. You only have one now because of me. I knocked one around last time I was here. But you're creating that space. You've created that environment where I come in. I got on. Now I'm professional, right? Like I've turned it up, and you created that environment. You've set that tone.
Well, thank you. I have seen really good podcasters sit in a closet because they're trying to dampen the sound, so they're using the clothes around them,
right,
to absorb that sound.
Yes,
and so no judgment if you're out there doing your podcast in a closet, but I think what you're saying is that you don't need to have that sophisticated.
You don't have to. But if you're doing this, if you know this is going to be consistent,
then you want to make that ambiance.
Right. If you're like, okay, I want to do this professionally.
Yes.
We're doing this professionally. So I want to make sure that I'm creating an environment. If you want to trial and error, you want to toy around with it to see. When I started cutting commercials, my best commercials were in my laundry room and in my car.
Okay.
Those were my best sounding commercials because I didn't have a space to cut them when I was at home, right? But those were my spaces. It was closed in, it was nice and quiet, and the room was dead. You don't want to do it in the living room when the kids are running around, or in the kitchen. You don't want to do it in the bathroom because of the acoustics, right? So you want to make sure that you have a nice space to do it. A lot of folks, they will dedicate a room and a space to host their podcast. And that's fine. But you want to make sure that you kind of dead the room a little bit. And I'm not saying, and sometimes like padding, like soundproofing, that could cost a lot of money. But something simple as putting pictures up, right? To dead the space a little bit and just putting some coverings up, curtains, heavy curtains, being in a space that has carpet, just rooms that have, spaces that are not too big, but also doesn't have a loud ventilation system in there, but you want to make it as quiet and as warm as possible, just like this room in here.
Well, I've had guests that come in and say, can you turn down the lighting? And so we even have a mood light.
That's right.
So just that, because I'm trying to make sure the guest, and again, this is an interview style.
Sure.
Because again, there's a number of popular shows where they really are not, the person's not even with them in the room.
Oh yeah.
They're hitting play, and they've something that's pre-recorded.
Right.
Which is okay. It's really the intentionality of what do you want to get out of it.
So what's your why? What is the end game here? Is it for, do I want to raise awareness? Do I want, am I informing my audience? Do I want to entertain my audience? Do I want to again, do this professionally? Am I doing this as a hobby? Think about who your target audience is. And podcasting, that's what it is. It's niche. Mm-hmm. That's what it's about. If I want to talk about cooking, there's a podcast for it. If I want to learn about my leaders, I know where to tune in.
That's right, PinLeader.
That's right. If I want to talk, if I want murder mystery, there's a podcast for every single thing I'm interested in. So you have to know what that audience is. And this is the thing. This is my philosophy is this. And I teach my students this too, is I think that this skill can be taught. You just have to have that expertise in something. Because when we're passionate, and we know about something really well, like if we're an expert in something, if I'm a business, if I'm an entrepreneur and I know about starting small businesses and the process, I can speak to that. I can speak to it clearly. I can speak to it professionally. I can ask questions about it. I can answer questions about it. I can research it. And I just need the proper equipment. I just need to know how to set it properly. Now, which leads into the next part of this, you know who you're talking to. You have your expertise, you have your equipment. Now you need to outline your podcast and you need to time it. And that's where I think a lot of the professional skill comes in, knowing your audience, because it's not about, I'm talking to everybody that has a business. No, you got to understand your audience behaviors, right? So someone who is, for example, listening to this podcast, they may not have time to listen to an hour podcast. Think about your audience. What are they doing? Where are they on their way to?
It's interesting you say that because I get so many compliments on, your podcast is the right amount of time because I can get in my car and drive.
That's right. But there are some folks who are sports.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sports, they may be able to go a little bit longer. So it has to do with age. It has to do with the niche. There's so many different moving parts that go. So it's knowing what the expertise is, but also knowing the behaviors of your audience. Now you got to outline this podcast. So we know that the average podcast is about, it's kind of changed, but we're at about 20 to 35 minutes is about a good sweet spot for a podcast. It used to be a lot shorter, but now we're about 25. 25 is good, but if you get to hour, way too, long for most podcasts, not all, but they're meant to be episodic. So you want them to be small and you want your audience to want more. That is it. Save room for the next podcast. Save room for the next episode, right? So outlining your podcast, making sure that you have a good structure. So if you have 1, 2, or 3 segments, okay, maybe I need to make these 5 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
Know how to come in and out, your intro and your outro. Outro jingle, right? Or a good intro, outro song that fits your audience.
It's interesting because of the amount of time people spend. It's almost like you're writing something and you get caught up in the one sentence that just pulls you. And I have told individuals who are thinking about doing it, and I said, just do it. Sit down, try it, and that experimenting and listen to your voice. How do you sound? And you have to have someone critique you.
You do. You do. And they have to be outside of your circle too. So start with, everybody, all your friends.
Well, I can't ask mom and dad. No.
Because they love everything. You can all day. And they're like, oh, it's so beautiful, honey. Yes. Have friends listen to it. Because first, right? Because they're going to be honest. But then you want to step outside of your circle to say, okay, what do you think? Give me a little bit of feedback.
Let me ask you this too. You have been involved in radio.
Yes.
And wonderful radio personality.
Thank you.
I enjoy listening to you. And so you have podcasting and you're teaching others podcasting. What do you see the difference between radio and podcasting?
That's a fantastic question because there is a difference. Radio is live. There are no takebacks. Once you say it, it's out there. I have the capabilities of editing. And then also when we talk about commercial radio, there are some constraints there. Like there are some FCC rules. So the Federal Communications Commission has regulations, rules and regulations that must be followed, and guidelines. You have station procedures that you follow. And even though your station, for the most part, luckily I came from the juice, which was they allowed me to be myself and, allowed me to explore different spaces and places. And so they gave me a lot of creative control. Now, and I think it's a lot different now, but in traditional radio, there's a lot of talent. They were confined to what they, can and can't say. And then we got out of, to me, the personality radio, where people were listening to radio for the personalities. And it just became robotic. Here's your song. Here's what's next. Here's what's coming up. When you get to podcasting now, you can hear personality. You can learn about that person. You can learn about their experiences. Like with a break, if I'm doing a radio break, which break in radio means the time that you're spending talking, it's limited. I may only have, unless I'm doing like a morning show or a talk radio show, I only have a couple minutes to get my thoughts out. But here we're going on, right? So, there's a lot of the limitations. There's less limitations when it comes to podcasting. You have the capabilities to edit. And I can talk about the things. So if I were to do a radio show and I had a podcast with it, it'd be a spinoff from some of the stuff I didn't get to talk about or say on my radio show. That's how I would do it.
I love that too. Any last pieces of advice for those that, again, who are thinking about podcasting? They see this plethora of podcasts out there. There's so many, and the reach is amazing. Well, I just checked our numbers. We've been downloaded in 18 countries.
Wow.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Thank
It's
you.
worldwide.
Yes. And 38 states. We're trying to get to all 50.
Oh, that's amazing.
To all 50. So those folks in Alaska, we're hoping to reach
That
them
is
too.
amazing. Congratulations. That is big.
Thank you.
That's big. Those are big numbers.
Thank you.
Those are big numbers. My advice is try it. Even if it's just as a hobby, give it a try. It's a great way to express yourself, creativity, and even to polish up and talk about the things that interest you. You have a perspective that you can offer someone else. Share it. Use that. Utilize and leverage your platform for the greater good. You can use it as a form of mentorship, just like you're doing. We're listening. We're listening to you. We're going to be reading your book, right? So use that, leverage that to empower, educate, inform, inspire. So you don't have to be the days of, having to be the radio host. Content creation, that is where it's at. It's expression is where it's at. And you have the capabilities. You can start it inexpensively. And then if you're like, this is where it is, I love this, then you begin to invest in it. But I also challenge you to also, there's a lot of free literature out there, like YouTube. Go to check out some YouTube. You could take a class with me at UT.
That's right.
But there's plenty of resources out there. There are free resources that you can find for outlining your podcast. And then when we talk about AI, finding ways to leverage AI and use that as a tool to help with the creative process. There's so many ways that you can use these tools, but then also you just definitely want to give it a shot. You definitely want to give it a try.
I can't thank you enough for encouraging, because I always look at every individual has a story.
That's right.
And everyone has an expertise. And thank you so much for coming on and encouraging.
Thank you.
To try it.
Yeah, and I would love to come back. And a second piece of this could be, okay, we started our podcast. We like it. Like I said you would. Now, how do we make money?
That, that is a great topic. We will put a pin in that, and we'll make a pinpoint, and we'll have to have you back. So thank you so much, Tisha. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we appreciate our listeners out there for liking the show and sharing it and encouraging others. We'd like to also thank sponsored by J. Foster Jewelers, family owned, offering the finest natural gemstones, stunning engagement rings, and brilliant diamonds. Thank you, J. Foster Jewelers. Also, too, if you have any feedback or thoughts for the show, please send us a note. info@aMAYSAssociatesltd.com. And as she mentioned, we do have the book coming out in just a short 4 weeks from now. So please get on the wait list, and you can do that at the same website at www.aMAYSAssociatesltd.com. So until next time.
The PinLeader Podcast is hosted by Dr. Shanda Gore and brought to you by Mays & Associates Ltd, creating customized solutions for growth in the areas of leadership development, strategic planning, and culture building. Find out more at www.maysassociatesltd.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the PinLeader Podcast and share with others.